Alrighty, y'all. Welcome back to the channel. So we may have a fairly controversial video for today, and that is because it's dealing with crossbows, which if you don't know, in the hunting community, crossbows kind of get a lot of hate and a lot of controversy. And there are a few arguments for and against that. I made a video called "Is Crossbow Hate Legitimate?" where I break it down. That was a fairly recent video, and that it got a lot of comments. It was definitely a World War II in the comments, so I kind of knew before and definitely confirmed afterwards that people get pretty religious when it comes to their hunting setups, especially their archery setups. But today we're not going to be discussing bows versus crossbows. We're talking about ways to cock your crossbow. We have the rope cocker and the crank cocker, and we're going to be discussing the advantages and disadvantages of each and which one might be best for you, and if one even has any advantages at all. So the first one, of course, is simply your rope cocker. To my knowledge, this comes with pretty much every crossbow. And this is the aftermarket crank cocker, which comes with some crossbows. It came with this one at the Black Friday package deal. But anyway, this is probably 15, 20 bucks if you didn't have one, if it broke, whatever. But of course, another good thing about it is it's pretty simple. You know, you just got the handle, the rope, and then just a little pulley there. So as you can see, you can pull this rope out and replace it if need be. So that's one thing I really like. It's simple, it's repairable, it's cheap. It's also lightweight and, fairly compact, at least when it compares to this. So this you can throw in a coat pocket, pretty much forget about it. This one being heavier, solid, obviously hard, because this one I believe is aluminum. Could be steel, I don't know. It does have some good weight to it. So if you put this in your coat pocket, you're definitely not going to forget about it. So also, this one is fairly expensive. I just did a quick search online. I believe these ones go for about $100 to $150. Most of the models that I was seeing now, instead of having these little hooks, they'll have like a plastic staple-shaped sled that rides on this, pulls this back. So fairly expensive. I imagine you might be able to get some cheaper, but this one is supposed to be silent and not click, scare away deer and all that. And so the advantage of this is that it's supposedly easier to cock your crossbow with. That's really the only advantage that I can see. Except for maybe the one scenario where, of course, if you're using a rope cocker, you got to stand on your crossbow and use your back. If you were in a tree stand sitting down, or if you had a tree stand that had a very narrow patch to stand on and you didn't want to fall off, I could see using this. But me personally, I just cock my crossbow before I go into the woods, simply because, you're not likely to see a deer, in my opinion, just when you're walking through the woods, because my stand is just very, very short distance within the woods. I'm not likely to see a deer, but I'd really hate to see a deer and not have my crossbow cocked. So that's my opinion on it. So we've established that pretty much the reason people buy these is because it's supposedly easier to cock. Now, I'm going to show you guys the testing footage now where we do a speed test. We'll see how long it took, and then I'll also address at the end and say which one felt easier to use. It is kind of subjective, as of course, I didn't measure it with the scale or anything. So I'll just give you guys my thoughts, and then you can leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Agree, disagree. Let me know your experience on it.
All right, so we're going to do a little test here, and this test is going to prove two things. We're going to see if I can physically pull this back with the rope cocker that comes with most crossbows. If I can easily do that, then I don't really think there's much of a need for a crank. And then we're also going to test if a crank is any faster or any slower. Now, I'm not going to go crazy fast because you're never going to do that in the field. I'm just going to go casual, and we're going to start the test now. There we go. So I plan on counting the time from the end of when I say now to when I hear that click. Now you can see I did drop it, but that was maybe a half second. And if we want to be realistic, we can't run 5 times and then just pick the best one. You know, whatever happens, happens. Stuff like that, you know, happens sometimes. We're not going to just cherry pick and find the best run and then go with that. If there was a major uh, mess up, like if I brought it out of my pocket and spent, you know, a minute untangling it, then we wouldn't count that. So I'm going to decock this, and then we're going to try the crank out next. All right, so now we're going to run this test again with the crank. Test start now. Just trying to keep some tension on the wires here. There we go. Take it off. There we go. All right, so there we go. After this, I'll figure out the times and then share my thoughts about how the experience was, how much force it took, and all that between the rope cocker and the crank cocker.
Alrighty, y'all. So hopefully you saw the footage. I got 18 seconds to cock it using the rope cocker and 44 with the crank. And obviously, as I mentioned, I'm not going for a speed here. I'm just kind of doing it casually. I don't know about you, but you know, when I come up to hunt, I'm not necessarily trying to waste time, but I'm not trying to go at light speed either. You know, I'm not gonna whip out the rope, which is what I most commonly use, and just you know, try and get it set as fast as possible. So I just tried to be as realistic as I could. And of course, I found this to be much faster, but I also found, at least to me, you know, it's kind of subjective, I found that this isn't necessarily easier. To crank it, if you've ever had, you know, I tried reeling in a pretty big salmon once. You could, at least I could like hardly move it. That's not the way it was with this. However, it was not easy by any means. When because I have no trouble using the rope to cock it. So I've always thought of a crank as sort of being, you know, for women. But honestly, I'm not sure if it is, because this is a 210-pound draw weight. I think I also saw a crossbow. It's a compound crossbow. I think it's a center point 390. I believe that's a 185 draw weight, but don't quote me on it. So this is fairly decent. I'm sure it's not the strongest, but it's not a wimpy crossbow either. 210-pound draw weight. If you're using a cocker, rope cocker, you're essentially lifting 105 pounds because it's a pulley. And you don't even have to use proper form either. So if you imagine a bar with plates on it, overall weight 105 pounds, just lift it up. That's all you got to do. I think, you know, there are some women that can do that and some that can't. I personally find it pretty easy to do. And once you get, you know, everything lined up, it just takes a second to do it. So this, on the other hand, you're kind of cranking it for a little while. And like I said, it's kind of like you have a fairly decent fish on there, not like anything absolutely massive, but you know, when I slide this onto here, it's hard to do one-handed here, but essentially like that. It'll kind of twist on there a little bit, simply because it feels like you're pulling a lot of force. I mean, it's doable one-handed, but you want to hold onto the bow and step on it, and you kind of got to put some strength into it. And personally, I'd rather just bend my back up and get it in one motion in 1 second than kind of just gotta, you know, go for 20, 30 seconds and just crank and crank with a decent amount of force. And once you get the rope up to here, it lets off. But it just seems like so much more work simply to carry it around and to cock it with this. Now, if you were maybe had a very weak back, but your arms were still good, like if you had surgery on your back or something, maybe this would be the route to go. But I just don't see a use for it. I mean, like I said, it's definitely doable one-handed. It's not necessarily difficult, not for me at least, but there is some good force that you got to use to get it done. And I just would rather get it done in 1 second. And yeah. So maybe I'm rambling a little bit about that, but honestly, I haven't used this much at all. I think I've cocked the crossbow a few times with it. And main reason I never used it was just because it's cumbersome. But now that I have used it, it's kind of cumbersome and slower and probably more work. So I personally would not recommend unless, you have a bad back or something and just can't lift. But, 105 pounds I don't think is unreasonable for any man to lift. And I think some women could do it too. But ultimately, it's up to you and what you can do. It's up to your preferences as well. Leave your thoughts in the comments below as to whether your experiences are different. I know there are some crossbows that have it built in. And I imagine if that was the case and I didn't have to carry any of this around, I'd probably just use that just because it'd be already on the bow. But between these two options, I'll take that. So leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Agree, disagree, or indifferent. Thanks for watching. God bless, and see you on the next one.